Hello, fellow Bitcoiners and designers. Welcome to the Bitcoin Up UXUI podcast, where we talk about the state of design of the Bitcoin network with a focus on user experience, interface, and general visual design. Today we talked with Rodolfo Novak from Coinkite and discussed their design process from branding to actual hardware design, supply chain, and the tools used in the creation of ColdCard and Opendime. Hope you like it. How's it going, Rodolfo? Thank you so much for taking the time. So I've been following your work for a while, and I really wanted to have a conversation with you. And since there's no real podcast that kind of looks at Bitcoin in a kind of design perspective, I thought it would be really interesting to talk to you and get your take on more user and design centric kind of approach to Bitcoin.
Cool.
So yeah, I was hoping that maybe, I know that you come from the Southern Hemisphere and you used to study art. So I was really hoping that you could maybe talk a little bit about those kind of early years and how somehow that transition to Bitcoin and how you use that in your work and in Coinkite.
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was interested in back in the day, design and art, and I sort of like got into that. And I mean, it's been so long. I've been so deep in tech and security now for over a decade that seems like a lifetime ago. But it's a consideration that always interested me, and I think our products reflect that. There is they have a certain aesthetic that sort of convey this Bitcoin ethos in them. They're transparent. You can see the PCB. Mm-hmm. It's all sort of like in that don't trust, verify mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that your partner Peter, who works mostly in the design part, in the Coinkite and ColdCard and Opendime, because I understand that I've always been fascinated by the kind of the branding and the design approach of the products you develop, and I was wondering, is this a collaboration between you two, or
it's a collaboration?
Nice. So, but is it something that who's handling more of the graphics?
Yeah, I mean, I do. We have people that do some stuff for us as well. Mm-hmm. It's not. We don't sort of like everybody helps with everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have very, very specific sort of like things I want, things I want things to look like, but I don't, especially for the hardware. I think it's important to sort of be a collaboration to achieve that look. It's yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's always really helpful to have someone, even if it's you or anybody else, kind of stress test your designs and figure out how they could be improved, because we need to kind of get out of our own heads when designing.
Exactly. It's kind of funny, but in terms of UX, our products are surprisingly very easy to use. Mm-hmm. And the bottleneck for our UX is actually the fact that we don't have a centralized wallet. Like Trezor and Ledger, they have their own sort of app on the computer kind of thing. I don't like that approach, mostly because of security and privacy issues. So we are in a way sort of beholden to the UX on Electrum, the UX on Bitcoin Core, or in other wallets that support ColdCard.
Yeah, but don't you think that, for instance, in all the instances I've used ColdCard, I felt like, okay, this is kind of a novel experience to use this tiny machine that's so isolated from everything else, but in a way it pretty much can consider it compatible with anything. It's just the software that's on your other machines that connect to the internet. They they kind of, it almost feels like they need to adapt to the cold card as opposed to having the cold card adapt to it. Maybe because the cold card is such an extreme example of like isolation.
Yeah, it's that was part of the feel, right? I wanted a device that was about the size of a credit card.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of credit card um, conceptual understanding in the world. There's a lot of boxes already for multiple cards. There's a lot of sort of economies of scale around that size, right? It's just I like leveraging sort of like existing economies of scale for things, right? So it's the same reason why you don't make a container in a different size.
Mm-hmm.
A container is that size because that's the size that you're going to find the steel sheets, that you're going to find, you know, the trucks, everything, right? So just not necessarily like completely going for the standard, but like just living within the standard. It really sort of makes the world a lot simpler for the people who are using the product.
Definitely. I think in my experience, the whole thing about how the cold card kind of changed everything was, before then, all I could think about was maybe go online and purchase a really old computer, disassemble it, and then just have some machine to generate private keys. And then suddenly the cold card comes and like, okay, this is this is basically the device that a lot of us were looking for. So now we don't need to kind of do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's because you're probably like me, right? Like I design the stuff around my needs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were looking at the market and we are like, you know, like I just can't believe there is not a device that like it's like secure enough, and that is like sort of uses this trust minimize model, right? That is like that runs off of a battery.
Yeah.
It's I was actually very surprised. None of my competitors actually like sort of improved their products in like so many years. You know, they're prettier now. They, you know,
Mm-hmm.
might have a color screen, might have, you know, some touch and stuff, but like it's the same stuff. Like they're not like nobody's experimenting with new experiences, right? It's the same idea with Opendime too. It's like people are not trying stuff.
Yeah.
They're not really sort of trying to invent new ways of using Bitcoin, and that's sort of to me the travesty.
Yeah.
You know, in 10 years, people should be trying to create stuff, not just sort of compete on future baiting.
Yeah, and I think the way Bitcoin presents a new paradigm, I think the products that surround the protocol also need to kind of develop a little bit of new design thinking, because the requirements are so different that the objects themselves need to be different.
Yeah, I agree, and it's you know, this is the first time that the value is actually in the computer, right? So before, the value was just sort of represented in something on the computer, but it was somewhere else. So I kind of feel like you have to encompass the metaphor somehow that the stuff is in it.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that's the design problem. Like, it's interesting that you said that you develop primarily these products for you and for everybody that on your team. I think that's probably the best design approach, because if you're trying to solve someone else's problem, you're not gonna really understand it. I mean, at some point, I think your own problem can evolve, but primarily, you tend to understand yourself a little better than everybody else. I mean, it's hard to
I
understand
agree.
yourself, but
No, I totally agree. It's people think they know what they want, and
mhm.
they think they're explaining well what they want, but it's kind of impossible to know what people really want. You know, we are users. We've been in this space for a while, so we figured, hey, you know, let's scratch our own itch, um, and that's what we came up with. You
Uh,
know, there is other things that we would love to do, but the constraints, the economies of scale of certain things are not there yet, right?
mhm.
So the product we have now is a market fit, right? Like it's sort of like what we can do for the size of the market that we have. and remain sort of like competitive and sort of profitable so that we can keep on making stuff. And like there is other technologies that we can do. We can create custom chips that we can reduce the size of things. We can use bigger, more expensive screens. There's a ton of stuff that could be done that we would love to do, but we don't think that the market can support those yet in a way that's sort of like healthy for the company.
Yeah, and I I I don't know. Sometimes I think of myself as being such an extreme conservative when it comes to Bitcoin. But for instance, the idea of having a bigger display, a color display, or a touch screen on a cold card, for me, it's almost like, do we really want this? Maybe it will make the usability so much better, but what are the trade-offs? Like, it's already hard for me to, I mean, hard or impossible for me to go into the code base and understand everything. You add another layer of complexity dealing with colors and dealing with more pixels, and suddenly it's like, okay, now I need to make sure that this library is not really touching the key generation. So somehow it's like, if you keep it to the bare minimum, I that's one of the things I really appreciate about the products you develop, is they're so pure and reduced that.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Like for me, some people like to, paint. Some people like to, I don't know, like ride horses, right? Like, I mean, I have some hobbies, but like, I really love making stuff, right? And but making stuff, there's a reason why I hate Raspberry Pis, right? It's because it's a product trying to please everybody and fails at all of that because it's just crappy hardware.
Mhm.
Um, but what's really nice about making stuff, when you have to be profitable, or when you have the constraint is not the size of the canvas, is like, can I fit this in the market, right? It's like, I don't care if you like my product or not. Are you willing to buy my product or not?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't care if you like it. Are you gonna buy it, right? Like, cause that to me is sort of like where it's at. It's like, are you willing to part away of your money to exchange for this device, right? Like that to me is the constraint I want to work with, right? I want to fit that market. Um, and Bitcoin is such a raw thing that like you said, like reducing the product to its bare minimum is where it's at, right? Like I want as simple as possible, like on the hardware side, on the software side, on the parts side, everything, the whole stack, because that's how you have less things to trust and you have less things to break, right? And we don't even include a USB cable on the package of the cold card, right? Um, it's I think sort of like that. That's the mentality that we have. It's not something we reflect a lot on. We just sort of sit and make things.
I love it. I think it's a great approach, and I think everybody. I feel like I'm still on the cold card Mark II. I haven't purchased the Mark III yet, so I'm not super familiar with the features that are exclusive to that. But for now, I think everybody that tries to take their kind of big Bitcoin practices to the extreme, at least within, I speak for myself, within my knowledge limitation, I feel like it's one of the most pure products out there that help users deal with the protocol and Bitcoin overall.
Yeah, I think I, we have a lot of sort of like love for example, black and white displays, and I think it shows even on the block clock, right? Like the
Yeah.
digits are like that. Um, and somehow, like Bitcoin is nothing more than numbers, right? So why should I use a color display to display numbers, right? Why should I make a bunch of like graphics and all kinds of colors and things and sort of like pollute the whole UI with it? It's that command line look is very, it puts me at ease, right? Because there's less stuff between me and the Bitcoin.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to put it. That there's no layer of fancifulness and crazy graphics between you. It's also somewhat respectful of the user because I feel like it's not dumbing it down, and you're dealing with serious stuff. Be careful, it's risky.
Right. Yeah, there is no bullshit.
Yeah.
That's how I like to put it. Right? Like we don't build the bullshit to begin with to have to remove it. It's and also maintainability, everything else, right? Like it's especially on embedded devices, right? Like if you do have graphics and things, it's like you have to maintain all that stuff. It's just more crap. Um, reducing everything is a plus, right? Bitcoin is a no bullshit money. I want to make a no bullshit device. I want to put all the features, and then we sort of like try to make it as easy as possible after we put all the features that we want. And you know, we will create a menu called advanced and stuff all the stuff there.
Yeah.
Right? It's because there's a lot of people who are advanced who need it. I'm not gonna take them away because you know some people, because most of the market can't use it. I still need it for myself, and it's going to exist.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if your product doesn't have a category in the menu called danger zone, you know, you're not a grown up.
Yeah, I think the level of openness, I think it's, yeah, ultimately it's your Bitcoin. You should be able to do whatever you want with it, even if you want to burn them or if you want to do something stupid with it. I think having a device that allows you to do that with the right warnings ahead of it, but I think it's
yeah. I mean, listen, we still ask you to confirm
yeah,
if you want to, you
course.
know, destroy all your money. But yeah, like it's like Bitcoin is permissionless, so should be the devices that work on it. I mean, you know, but there's also like certain realities, right, to it that that I have to sort of understand the limitations of my market, right? So, you know, I'm not making a device that's going to fit, you know, the many newcomers, unless it's like say Opendime. But you know, I do have less market
Yeah.
for making products that don't support shitcoins or don't have centralized, you know, unless I make compromises, right? Like a lot of compromises, like Ledger and Trezor do. I can't get that whole market. Um, so you know, that's the choices we make.
Yeah, and I think it's great because why please everybody? You end up probably diluting your use case, and then you end up with a little device that's probably not that useful.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the problem. Well, that's the problem with some of the competitors, right? You know, one of them sort of has like a lot of like cool designy things and like blog posts that make everybody feels great, and you know, it has no security.
Yeah, but at that point, like, why not use your laptop and a mouse? It's compared to
Exactly,
that.
right. At least like one of the bigger ones that's closed source, you know, at least it's secure, it's closed source and all, but that's their compromise. But so but at least they're secure, and they're sort of trying to take this approach more on a consumer electronic level with more sort of professional way of going about it.
Yeah.
It's not a compromise I want for myself, but I can respect that. It's more sort of like that middle place where one of my competitors find themselves now, that I don't think that it's a good place to be in.
I tend to agree. So maybe if you could talk a little bit, like I'm really curious because when you're developing a product from a design point of view, obviously there's a little bit of like exposing the product into the world. And one of the things I really like about especially the Opendime is that it has a kind of a, I don't know how to really characterize it, but like punk.
Cypherpunk, yeah, it's like
Yeah,
a
but
sci-fi look to it.
yeah, and I think it's so effective. I mean, I'm sure it's alienating part of the market because some new users probably want to see something a little fluffier. But yeah, I don't know.
Those
Maybe
people are not doing Bitcoin.
yeah,
See, that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, for many years, I tried making the stuff that's like, debit cards and debit machine and look very corporate and sort of like try to do the stuff to sort of like copy the mainstream market of like financial products, right? And that's not the people using Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean that already exists, so why
Exactly.
why repeat it?
The people using Bitcoin, uh, they are weird. We are all weird, right? I mean, just the fact that you understand what the word central banking means, probably means you're weird. So I want to make that product. I want to make the world I wanna be, right? Not the stuff that exists. It's kind of like we're in the space station there using little open dimes as as barter, right? uh, so that's sort of like yeah, that's kind of how we approach it.
Yeah, and I think it definitely strikes, I think, the perfect balance. When I first saw it, to be honest, I didn't really understand what is this USB stick that carries Bitcoin, like how do I interact with it, but it kind of just the logo and seeing it on t-shirts and seeing it on a website just feels like, oh, I think this conveys the ideals that I'm kind of striving for. And it really, I don't know, it was really interesting to see it for the first time, and it's a really nice design object. I wonder, how much time do you put into into the actual design of the object, like the the typography that goes around that ring, and like
Everything. Like we put a lot of time in that, especially because uh, this was designed in Eagle. That's the software they use to design PCBs, right?
uh I guess, I don't know.
Yeah. So and this is not a design program.
Yeah.
Let's just put it this way. It is a monumental amount of time put in just to get stuff right. It's not like if anybody worked with Vigo before, they understand.
So for instance, to imprint that typography around the ring, do you actually have to kind of fake a circuit, or
Yeah, no, it's a real circuit. It's
oh.
this is done with yeah. So it's got the thankfully Eagle supports fonts, right? There is 3 of them. Um, and but it's very specific and it's actually part of the PCB. Then for example, it doesn't really have any design tools, right? It's designed to just for you to make like lines and traces. So for example, we had to write a little program to make those rays, the little rays that like around the hole.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff like that. It's very tricky. The B for Bitcoin on the version 3, I can't remember if version 4 is also true, but I remember version 3 and before is actually the 5-volt signal.
So there's actually electricity going through those circuits. Is that
Some of them yes, some of
okay?
them no, right? So for example, the stuff that's not exposed, there is no electricity on it.
Got it. Nice. That's really interesting. I mean, I think it's really interesting because if it's purity, you kind of, and the limitation of the tools, like in a way, I'm kind of thankful that Eagle doesn't support any fonts that you could use, because then you could, like, maybe you would go on a rampage and start over designing. But
Yeah, it's I don't know, like I'm not a fan of the empty canvas sort of process
mhm.
of design for myself. I just don't function well in that. I like constraints because it's like I want to solve a problem. So like the more constraints, the more like um fulfilling it is to me. I really enjoy not being allowed to do most things and sort of like see
Mhm.
how we can work around those problems.
Yeah, when you solve a problem, it's so much more rewarding, because you're like, there's actually something, that there's a hurdle that was overcome.
Yes.
And just switching to the cold card, just I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how it is to, in such a minimalistic display, how do you go about and figure out the UX and the user flows of going from screen to screen, selecting options?
It's kind of funny, but this was the constraint for decades and decades of electronics when the first sort of LCDs came about. Like very little memory and very small displays. So we don't really have a lot of stuff to do, right? It's like you take a transaction, right? You review things, and then we ask you, do you want to do this? You don't want to do that, right? Kind of thing. So those interactions are very sort of simple. And then what we do is we just push the things that matter to the top, and then we let you scroll down for more information, kind of thing, right? And that's how all the flows are designed. There is not a lot of fluff, I guess. Once you start designing too much fluff, that's when you sort of get in trouble. And then, menus are just selectable choices, right? I mean, there is not a lot more than just scrolling down and finding the thing you want and then sort of drilling down. We try to keep the drill down to a minimum. I think the maximum drill down in a menu is like 3
levels.
Yeah, maybe it's 3 levels. If you have to go more, so be it. But yeah, so we try to keep those things simple. And then things that are not very used by anybody, we make those into Easter eggs. Many menus have Easter eggs. So, for example, like for making a backup, right, on the microSD, it doesn't offer you the option of not making a unencrypted backup. So it has to be encrypted. But, we need to do testing. I need to do stuff. So, if you press a secret number there, I think it was number 4, it's not documented on the menu. It's in the docs, but not in the menu. Will ask you if you want to do, are you sure you want to make it an encrypted backup?
Nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so a lot of menus have a secret number that's often a random one. They'll let you do something that you shouldn't.
So now I have to go through all the menus and click all the numbers to see if there's an option hidden there.
I believe most of them are documented, though, on the docs, just not in the UI.
Nice. So it sounds like you're saying that because the UI is so rudimentary and so well established in the kind of the computer and hardware experience that we've been having for decades now, you don't feel the need to map out the flows. And
we don't map out. I don't have a single flow chart of menus for any of the devices we make.
That's interesting.
We just, because see, the development process, right, of the actual device is very similar to the flow of use of the device, right? So, the first thing you're going to do as you're building this is, first you build some UI, right? So you have UI, and then you build, okay, so what's the thing the hardware wallet does? Well, sign transactions, right? So you make that happen, and you just work that through as a user. Okay, now we have that. Now let's add the second functionality. Well, where does second functionality go? Well, below the first functionality. Yeah. And where does the third functionality go? Well, under the second, right? And so it goes that way. And then we often go into a process where as a team, we sort of go through the things and maybe rearrange the menu a little bit, right? To just clear out things. Sometimes you do things just to be fast or lazy. So we just sort of may rearrange some of the order or recategorize things, but that's it. What else is there to do?
Yeah, that sounds totally viable. No, that's great. It feels like such an organic process that it may be just because it's so minimal that you don't need to go through all the overhead exercise of making like this really complex experience more intelligible, because it's already so straightforward.
I think including less people in the process, it's one of the reasons why we often we don't put the source code, we don't put the stuff out in public, even though it is open source, until we're ready to put it in public, right? This is not a democracy. This is not collaborative with the users. It is very much of an autocracy and how the design is going to be done, right? Like, not the code, not the science, right? The science is done collaborative. The science needs peer review, but the design is our vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we like sort of like when the product is ready, then we make it public.
Yeah, and I think that makes total sense because you and your team are the people that are thinking about this day in and day out. I mean, I use it and I think, oh, this could be done this way, but okay, I'm not considering everything around that decision. There's probably intricacies that I don't even understand. So I think that makes a lot of sense. There is no good result coming out of design by committee, I don't think.
Not really. It's and also, yeah, it's like the smaller the team, the less people involved, the better, right? I mean, you really want to keep things as
Streamlined.
Yeah, I wouldn't say streamlined, but yeah, like less committees, right? Less like, again, right? Because a user experience is something very personal, right? It's something you do yourself in your own life. So when we're trying to design the product, it's like, it's a single person who's going to use it, so it should be mostly of a single person who's going to make it. I mean, there's not a lot of it's not infected by too many different ways of thinking about it, and then it gets confusing.
Yeah, and everybody has their biases that
exactly
cloud,
and then you're making a compromise between different biases, right? That gets extra. It is possible to get there through that path too, but then you need even more people and even more sort of iterations and even more testing. So you have to essentially like add. It's very additive, and then you have to do all the process all around again to be reductive, right? When you start very small, it's reductive by design.
Yeah, when you in developing, do you look outwards for a lot of community contribution on GitHub, or do you tend to, I mean, probably if someone finds a bug, I'm sure that you review it and you integrate the solve, but you don't tend to look too much on the contributions or on Twitter. You tend to stay a little bit away from that and stick to the internal decisions. Is that correct to say?
No, we do love when people contribute, especially to functionality or bugs or improvements kind of thing. Less on the UI side, and people do contribute, but the problem is like hardware is hard.
Yeah.
and so there's a lot less people that do hardware development, right? So it's not going to be like many projects that can take a lot more contribution because there's a lot more people that could contribute. And this is also security product, right? So there's a lot of revision, there's a lot of attention put into anything that could come into the code base.
It makes total sense. I admire so much that you were able to come up with the logistics, let alone the knowledge to assemble all the parts, put them in a really nice packaging and ship it out to people that actually want to buy it. It's super impressive. I think everybody really loves the product, especially on the ColdCard.
Well, thanks.
And maybe, is this something that you found very hard to deal with on the hardware side? Dealing, like, I imagine that you need to constantly be on the lookout for new parts or technology developments that might improve the performance or the security of your devices.
Well, Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, we would love to have more memory to do more things and faster. But we've reached sort of like the top of the line of the family of the current main microprocessor we use. So to go to do something else now, we need to get something else, right? Like, so we would need to change a lot of code, and quite a bit on the board, and also, we're always like looking for the next sort of like improvement we can do with security. So that's why we made Mark III, right? We wanted to use the newer version of the secure element we use, because we wanted to put the counter in the secure element. That was a biggie for me. And but we are still looking now for sort of like the next level of security as well. Security is not a static thing, right? Like, given infinite resources and infinite time, anything is breakable.
Yeah, and a genius idea could render all the security useless. So it could change very rapidly, I think.
Yeah, so we want to keep on improving, because, see, I think, like, I'm a big believer that, like, if you have a $100 device to hold your life savings, right? It's not a huge investment for us to keep on improving it on the hardware side, and people to just get the new one, right? It really is not a huge investment when you're talking about your life savings.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I
So
think, yeah, and I think we're so early that these are, I almost feel like everything related to Bitcoin, it's kind of a potential collector's items that in 50 years it's going to be such, I mean, it already has so much more of a emotional value, but it might actually become kind of a museum piece almost.
well, people do collect the original. I've seen the original Opendimes, the green ones, going for like $100. I've seen the first version in black going for 50 or so. But it's interesting, right? These things do increase in value because they're never going to be made again, right? I'm never going to make the version one again.
Yeah,
and I don't know. It's a memento of you being there at that time in a space that's starting out. It's kind of like an Apple II, right? Having some of the original Apple hardware from when the computer was sort of like being invented for consumers. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's fun. We're all nerds, anyways.
Yep. And I know that I've seen a couple of videos and images of like a kind of a bare bones ColdCard being used on top of the London Times. I'm imagining that's kind of an emulator, so you can.
Yes. So for development, we built like a full blown simulator. It simulates everything, including the USB, so that people can do development for the ColdCard. And right now you can even connect a real ColdCard and use a secure element in the real ColdCard for the simulator, which is really cool. But yeah, so since these are devs, I figured, hey, you should see the ColdCard without the keys.
Yeah, of course.
Right? I mean, because you're doing development inside, so no clothes. And the newspaper on the back is the Chancellor original.
So do you? I never used it. I never used the simulator, but it feels like such a useful tool to actually help with the development.
Yeah, it's very hard to do hardware development on the hardware, because you constantly need to reboot, and it's kind of like trying to work on the BIOS, right, of a PC, right? So you need to do stuff from a different device and sort of update, and then reboot, and then try, and it's a very, very, very multi-iterative process. So having a simulator on the computer that you can just very quickly reboot and sort of continue working is makes life a lot easier.
For sure. And what do you? So is this something that you push for people to actually like? I know that I've gone through a couple of couple of updates on the ColdCard, but I definitely never compiled the code for myself, and verification of the code is somewhat limited. So in some ways, I'm relying a lot on your benevolence to not input
Steal your
any.
money.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people reviewing the code, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot. We've paid security researchers. There's security researchers just trying to get some PR. The competition spends all day trying to break our stuff. There is a lot of eyes on it. ColdCard is now what, like 2-3 years old. I actually lost track of it.
Yeah.
There is a lot of core devs who use ColdCard. There's users who pay other people to review ColdCard by security researchers. So I think we're in a good place, right? I mean, we probably sell more devices now than Trezor does.
Nice.
So there is a lot of eyes on it.
Yeah, that's great. I tend to agree. Like a lot of people that I respect recommend this the ColdCard, so I tend to defer a little bit. But in a way, it's also good that you kind of, it feels like you want to keep things simple. Like it feels like it's also a design decision to keep things simple, so it's easier. Or
well, one of the ways we force that on ourselves is keeping the team small.
Mm-hmm.
So there is so much you can do with a small team and ship, right? So if you're then it's not even a choice. I think that self-imposed way of development sort of keeps us on track. We have to make choices, right? There is like 50 features we want to do, so we have to prioritize because the resources are like smaller.
Yeah, and I imagine it's also easier to coordinate. There's not a lot of people like stepping on each other's toes, and
There's none of that. Exactly. Like there's one manager in the company. It's me. That's it.
Do you work together or remotely?
Remotely.
Everybody's remotely.
Yeah.
Nice.
Everybody's in Toronto too.
No, that's amazing.
Aside from some contractors that might do a thing here and there, like everybody's in Toronto. The only time we see each other in person is to eat steak.
Nice.
But everything is done that way. We don't even have Slack. We have our own IRC server, and that's how we do our thing.
Oh, interesting. How do you move around? Kind of. I mean, maybe
we just use a courier company to send hardware between each other, and we have a factory that's like contract manufacturing that has a line for us in like 30 minutes north of the city. So they do prototypes for us. We do prototype in our labs, and then we sort of like iterate that way, and then the factory starts making it.
What is the reaction of the vendors in the factory when you approach them with, "Hey, we want to make this device"? Do you explain to them just the specs, or do you?
No, we just give them marching orders. There is not a lot for them to think. Like they're not part of the process.
But are they curious about the device they're manufacturing?
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah. They're definitely curious about the devices. But yeah, they're not a huge part of the process.
Yes, I think it's such an interesting development that potentially we have all these constraints in Bitcoin driving the hardware manufacturing, and even potentially, I don't know exactly how it works, but I can see a future where even the supply chain changes a little bit to accommodate to all these.
Oh yeah, no, we have a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah,
the guys from the factory are always like looking at our faces like, what? You know, because say they make the board, right?
mm-hmm.
And then they have to do a operation with a secure box we have to do some part of the programming of the device, and then they close the case, and then they have to plug it again into a different box that does a second part of the programming, and that, you know, the box is like booby trapped and chained to the desk kind of thing, right? So you know, but these guys have some experience with, you know, with secure environments and things like that. But you know, there is physical sort considerations, right? And then, you know, we ask them to scan to connect the code card to this other machine that links the code card to the bags, right, to package them.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's a lot of weird processes in the and then for Opendime, one of the steps in programming, you know, we have a facility that does programming, say for like military kind of thing, right? So like it's like a secure programming facility that puts the firmware in one of the chips for the Opendime. And what's funny is that we don't trust them either, right? So they only do part of the process, and then we take it out of their hands, and then we put it on the boards, and then we do a second part of the process, the pairing of the secure element to the MCU. So yeah, we have a lot of weird processes that are not very familiar to most electronics industry, unless they're doing security stuff or more sort of advanced hardware.
Yeah. I love it. It's amazing. It's like it's serving a whole new type of user that's somewhat paranoid. And,
yeah.
And you take this paranoia to the extreme. And I would imagine there's even more extreme solutions than ColdCard that have not been invented yet, that maybe are not as practical, but it's such a novel approach. It's really interesting to see develop. And I have a note here that I know that the ColdCard was launched in December 2017, so it's like so young and already so evolving so quickly. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a small industry, right?
Yeah.
So most people that need to know about it already probably heard about it. So it's a matter of them just trying it, and then once they try it, I mean, once, you know, I like to make products that's kind of like this. Like once you try it, that's it. Like you want to use it. It's that's kind of how I feel about ColdCard and Opendime. It's like once you go ColdCard, you really don't go back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to maybe wrap it up, you mentioned that you use no user flows. The UI is very constricted to the technology you want to use. Is there any way that you kind of approach even the design of the hardware? Do you have, instead of using like big whiteboards or post-its, do you actually like have big printouts of the schematics of the electronic components that go into each of the devices and kind of try to figure out
Nope.
how to? No, it's all done
Very organic. Very organic. You know, I do have, you know, like professional 3D printers, like, you know, like forgot the name of technology now, the liquid resin stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, like I'll go on Fusion, I'll play around, you know, print some things, see how it feels in the hand. But then, you know, we have an industrial designer that works with us, and you know, I'll get him to polish the ugly duck I made,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like and use the correct engineering, right, to you know, the ribs on the case, and he understands plastic molding and stuff, right? So that it does well, but we have an exact vision of what we want, right? And we just need to get it out there. And but yeah, it's like, and then there's considerations like, for example, you know, we use a very specific plastic on the casing, right? This is not your standard consumer product plastic. This is like polycarbonate, which is much stronger. and has like nice properties on how it gets transparent. But we want to make sure the thing doesn't break. And those things sort of like they influence the design mostly by constraints.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's really great because you can look at the object and if you don't know what it is, it feels kind of foreign. But once you understand what it is, you can really see that there's nothing left to chance. Like even the numbers and the check mark. I was like, oh, shit, there's so much attention to the details on everything. It's really nice. I'm really excited to see what you come up with next. And I know that in your website you have the terminal and the Bitcoin server. Um, I know that a long time ago, I think you were working on the terminal, but is this something that you're still?
Yeah, so we started making a second terminal with like touch and all that stuff. That was pretty, but there is no market for it. A terminal competes with a phone.
Yeah.
Right? Like a lot of devices compete with a phone, and a phone is like amazing. Like you have like the RAM of a computer from a year ago on it, right? Like you have a big screen, you have all this stuff in there, and you really can't compete with it. So we try not to. Products that compete with it seem to fade away very fast, right? So if you're gonna have a hardware wallet that's like kind of like not that secure, then might as well use a phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even argue that it's even a little too early for devising terminals and POSs, because I think we're still on the stage of people trying to understand how to save Bitcoin and not necessarily spend. So, I mean, I'm totally.
If you want to integrate stablecoin in a terminal, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But but it's kind of funny, right? Because in the early days, people wanted to spend Bitcoin, so it made sense making that, and that's what was our understanding was, right? This is money. As time progressed, as the industry started to understand economics better, because most people came from tech. There were a few people from economics, but most people came from tech. We started to understand economic concepts better, right? We started to understand some of the Austrian stuff. And sort of the store of value thing finally started to make sense, right? So it was a journey that most people went through. That's why there was so much payment stuff on the early days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't even think people need to understand economics. You just see the price go up.
Number go up.
Yeah, I don't want to spend it. I don't need to read an economy book. I just want to keep it. It's
right.
like instinctual.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about, but it was great. Thank you so much for taking the time. Obviously, this is like my first attempt of doing a podcast. I hope that people find this interesting. And
well, it was my pleasure. It's fun to talk about the UX and design of on Bitcoin stuff. It's one of those topics that I have not seen much. I only see people complaining about how Bitcoin or products are not easy, but I don't see a lot of people actually trying to improve that with their actual time, right?
yeah.
So I think that maybe this idea you had of this podcast, maybe this sort of sparks more thinking around this stuff, but actually also more doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's totally the goal, is to try to bring every design episode and every design story that everybody has to the forefront, and kind of inspire designers that are not even interested in Bitcoin, because I feel like a lot of designers are looking for interesting things to work on, and they neglect to notice Bitcoin as being this amazing new technology. It's like working for Google in the early days, I think.
Right. Imagine if say designers can contribute to some of these projects because they would need to learn how to code, right? But why aren't they trying to add all the verbs to say font awesome, right? So create icons for sign transaction, for this and that, right? Like for all the verbs that we need in Bitcoin. You know, that there's a lot of room to contribute in all this stuff. You know, it's one of those things, like, you know, get to work instead of complaining.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think it's somewhat of a realization I've been coming to. You have Twitter and you have the internet in general. In Bitcoin, it feels like that's like our project management tool. People go in on Twitter and they complain, and you see, okay, wow, there's a need for this. I don't even need to come up with my own ideas. I just see that people have this need. You just turn your computer and do it and see if people like it. If they don't like it, move on or try to
I
make it
think
better.
it's we just haven't had a system, right, that aside from the internet in the early days, it doesn't require permission. And I think especially the design marketing people, they haven't worked in environments where you don't need permission, right? So it's like, just do
Yeah,
do it. If
everybody's
people like
waiting
it, they're
for,
going to use it.
everybody's waiting for a brief. Everybody's waiting for like marching orders, when in fact you get to decide what you want to work on. And there's so much. I feel like there's so much that needs to be worked on. It's really a matter of people getting
Sit
to it.
your butt on a chair and get it done, right?
Yeah.
And if people like it, they'll use it. If they don't, well, then you made something people don't want.
Yeah. Again, to the collector's item bucket, failed
That's
Bitcoin
right. I
products.
mean, you know, I have my share,
Yeah,
boxes and boxes of stuff. It's just how it goes.
yeah, and I think you really need to fail a bunch of times until you get something that's actually good.
That's right.
Okay, Rodolfo, thank you so much for joining. It was great talking to you. Hope to see more coming out of Coinkite, and yeah, thank
Well,
you.
thanks for having me, and good luck on this podcast. I kind of look forward to listening about Bitcoin and sort of design and UX and that sort of stuff that we have definitely a hole there in the market for you.
Great, thank you. I'll do my best. Thank you so much. Have
Bye.
a great day.
You too.